So one thing that at a glance that I feel like isn't getting quite enough discussion about the Indianapolis Colts going into this offseason are some of the decisions that have to be made on the offensive line and how they are going to handle this unit moving forward. And I can see why that is. Like, of all the things we had to be upset about this year, of all the things we've justifiably been upset about during Chris Ballard's time here, the offensive line is a unit that has essentially been covered the entire time. Like, short of trusting Matt Pryor one season at left tackle, and maybe a year or two where we've looked at the unit as a whole and been a little bit disappointed, we haven't exactly had a lack of personnel there at any point. And any discussion we've had about disappointment or the deficiencies of the offensive line as a whole were much more so us looking at it and saying, hey, you guys are considered to be one of the best units in football. You're not quite living up to that standard, as opposed to us ever actually having to look at this offensive line and saying, hey, you guys just flat out can't get it done. And I'm talking, of course, about in Chris Ballard's time here. Like, it's just one area of the team since he's been the general manager that we've been able to count on, in the sense that the bottom has never fallen out of that unit. Like, even at their absolute worst, the offensive line for the Indianapolis Colts has never really been the issue that caused some sort of fallout in any season under Chris Ballard. Now, with all of that being said, I bring all of that up because it's a unit that right now, going into this offseason, for me, I look at and say it's kind of at a little bit of a crossroads. Like, a unit that has just been so clear and certain and just on cruise control for all of this time, I am now looking at and saying, hey, we have a couple of tough decisions to make, the most obvious of which being that Ryan Kelly decision, right? Whether or not to re-sign him. But you also have Will Fries, starting right guard, of course, broke his tibia very early in this season. He's due for a contract. You have Braden Smith, and whatever it is that's going on there, which is seemingly a very serious situation, and you only hope for the best for him. But you have Braden Smith on the book for damn near $20 million. And while we talk about things like the defensive coordinator, right, Smooth Lou, and the guys that he's bringing in, right? He brought in his guy from the Bengals at the linebacker coach, kept Charlie Partridge. We talk about things like that. Needs in the secondary, a backup quarterback, a tight end, drafting Tyler Warren. All of these things that we have discussions about, one thing we don't see getting talked about are some of the tough decisions that are right in front of us that need to be made in regard to the offensive line. And it's just one of those things, in my personal opinion, that could very quickly slip away from the Indianapolis Colts if they were to take it for granted. You know, the offensive line is one of those things that nobody really talks about until they're not doing well. Like, best case scenario, you don't have a thing to say about an offensive lineman the entire game. Like, maybe once or twice in like when you're running the football and he gets a pancake. But overall, if you're pointing out an offensive lineman throughout the course of a game, generally it means he didn't do something very well. And it's easy to pretend that they're not all that important of a unit until you're watching your franchise quarterback retire due to you constantly neglecting that unit, right? And I know we're nowhere near that point right now as Colts fans, but we don't want to accidentally start moving in that direction. And I do believe that there is a world where this offensive line becomes a huge topic of discussion a year from today if this organization is not careful in how they approach it going into this offseason. So I want to talk about how I view some of the decisions I mentioned on the offensive line as we make our way into the offseason, and how I feel any potential concerns can be mitigated with this unit, and then we'll go on our merry way. But before we do, you know what it is. I have to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask anyone watching on YouTube and enjoying the show, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Of course, subscribe if you want to be a part of the journey. We want to get to 4,000 by the start of next season. I believe that would be 33% growth as per the numbers. That's quick math right there. This brain, I'll tell you, I was the absolute worst at math in college. Like, they literally gave me ninth grade math in like my junior year of college, and I still got like a C plus or a B minus. Like, it was that bad, but apparently I can figure out 33%. Audio listeners, leave a five-star review. Let the people know how much you enjoy the show. But most importantly, let's enjoy the discussion. Let's be civil in the comments section, right? You don't know what the person on the other side of the computer is going through today. The goal here is simply to further the discussion. We may agree, we may disagree, But it's important to keep in mind that we're all rooting for the same thing here, I think. Like, we're all rooting for the Colts' success. So keep that in mind as we share our opinions, okay? And I want to start here, back to the regularly scheduled programming, with Ryan Kelly, because I think that's really the big one. And a lot of people are talking about the decision to let him go. Like, it's an absolute no-brainer to just let Ryan Kelly walk into free agency. And I don't quite get why that is. Like, I know he went through a tough time a few years back, and retirement was reportedly on the table at that time, but he has since then dispelled that as recently as this season, and it seems as if those discussions are far behind us. And now, given all of that, you look and say, well, okay, he's going on 32, not 38. And in the world of an offensive lineman, 32 isn't really all that old. Like, you've still got some time of quality football left on the offensive line. Broad stroke, generally speaking, of course. Like, they age far better than something like a running back or a wide receiver or a corner. Players like that, right? Primarily because despite needing to be an athlete on the offensive line, ultimately the level of athleticism you need to maintain is far easier to bring into an older age than it would be at one of those other positions. Like, the offensive line, far more about strength than it is speed. Not to say you could, walk around with your feet in the sand or something like that, but you don't exactly have to run a 4.5 40 to be playing on the offensive line. That's the only point I'm bringing up. So you take that into account and couple it with what we know about Ryan Kelly, and it's that he's the ultimate professional. He's one of the best centers in all of football. He's been a leader in this locker room. I'm not exactly sure what it is that I'm missing. Like, sure, on any given season, he's probably going to miss 1, 2, 3 games, something along that line. But is that really enough to go into the land of uncertainty at a position where we know we can probably get 3 to 5 years more of high quality football out of this player? Like, with all the things that we feel like we need and all the things that we feel like we need to sort out for this team going into the future, Ryan Kelly is the guy that we want to let walk. Like, listen, we all love Baylor Tortellini, and we love how he came in relief of Ryan Kelly. But are we sure that we want to take him from a depth piece that needs to come in when he needs to come in and actually make him the guy that we rely on from week to week on the offensive line, whether that be at center, guard, or anywhere else? I mean, if the concern is Ryan Kelly's contract, we can find the space. And not for anything, it does make me laugh a little bit when I look at Colts fans and they say, yeah, Ryan Kelly we could keep if it's at the right price. Well, okay. I mean, I just know one thing, that you criticize Chris Ballard all the time. And maybe, of course, there's people who are saying this and also like Chris Ballard. But overall, the consensus would be we don't like Chris Ballard, even though I am maybe not as hating him as much as you. Not the point, okay? Stick with me. If you're going to say, let's look at the best center in the league or one of the best centers in the league, and we'll keep him if it's at the price that we like, you're starting to sound a lot like Chris Ballard when you say something like that to me, or at least the parts of Chris Ballard that you don't like. That's my only point in bringing that up. I mean, you talk about finding cap space, like the Colts don't have options. Right now, Raekwon Davis, okay? He is getting paid more than guys like Zaire Franklin, Tyquan Lewis, Alec Pierce, Bernard Raymond, Nick Cross, and I know some of those things have to do to rookie contract timing and all of that stuff, but Raekwon Davis is one of the top 10 got paid players on the Indianapolis Colts. That's a 53-man roster. What the hell did he do to warrant that? What did he do to warrant that? If you cut him, you were to save, $6.5 million? I know you don't want all your depth on the defensive line to be thwarted, but you have DeForest Buckner, you have Grover Stewart, and presumably you could find someone to bring what Raekwon Davis brings to the table in free agency or the draft. Am I wrong about that? Am I that far out of bounds by suggesting that? Well, okay, you look at him, right? And then you look at a Samson Ebukam and say, well, okay, you surprisingly picked up Kwity Paye's 50-year option, something that maybe a lot of people have forgotten about at this point. But generally speaking, that would imply that you view a player as part of your future. So you have Kwity Paye, you put the 15th overall pick this past season into Laitu Latu and project him to ascend as a pass rusher into something better than what we saw. And you look at Samson Ebukam and say, well, okay, cutting him, that's $7.5 million. So between cutting him, $7.5 million, and cutting Raekwon Davis $6.5 million, that's $13 million that now you've paid for a season of Ryan Kelly's contract just off of getting rid of two guys that, quite frankly, how much do they move the needle, right? That's all I'm trying to say. And then you look at Braden Smith, too, if we're talking about the saving of the money. Okay, like, we know something is going on there with Braden Smith. We have no clue what that is, and it's one of those situations, of course, where you don't want to be insensitive, right? Because obviously these guys are human beings and they have lives, and we don't want to minimize something that could potentially be very, very serious. But at the same time, if we're to speak as Colts fans, it's just hard to accept once again a lack of transparency about a player that we're paying a lot of money to, and we can't trust him to be on the field. I mean, he's on the books for nearly $20 million. Okay, if you're to cut him, you would save $17 million against the cap. And right now, the Colts are sitting at about $32 million in cap, which is kind of middle of the pack in the league. And not for anything, do we think that we need to spend a little bit? Not saying we will, right? We don't know if that's going to be the case. That's, of course, all speculation at this point. But, we're going to get rid of Ryan Kelly because we feel like he's going to count too much against the cap. I think we can find other ways to find the money for him. Like, we have Goncalves, we have Blake Freeland, other options in free agency. We know we draft the offensive line well. Hell, we drafted Braden Smith. Like, all the guys on our offensive line that we like were brought in by Chris Ballard. Like, if there's anything we could trust them with, it's making sure that the talent we bring in through the draft could come in and play. You can't help but at least think about the idea of cutting Braden Smith, at least when it comes down to picking between him and Ryan Kelly. Like, I'm not saying cutting Braden Smith is the move, but if you're telling me to pick between him and Ryan Kelly right now, hell, I'm picking Ryan Kelly. It just is what it is. Like, if you pay Ryan Kelly and keep Braden Smith, which is an option, you're talking about 3 of the top 6 or 7 players on your team, highest paid guys, are on your offensive line. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but just looking at that, you say, well, okay, that's just one unit on this team. There's a lot of other guys that are going to have to be paid. It does make you at least look and ask the question as to how you're allocating that money. Like, is $20 million to Braden Smith right now an optimal use of those funds? Like, that is a lot of money. That's one of the biggest contracts we have on the team. Again, with other guys in the wings, as I said, Goncalves, Freeland, and again, the potential acquisitions we have this offseason, okay? That's something to think about. If we're talking about getting rid of Ryan Kelly, I would be inclined to say, hey, if we're going to get rid of someone on the offensive line, let's keep Kelly and cut Braden Smith. Now, on the other hand, you do talk about the names I mentioned we could cut in Braden Smith, Raekwon Davis, and Samson Ebukam. All of those contracts expire at the end of next season. So even if we pay them this year, going into next offseason, which I know is a whiles away, but at the same time, if we're talking about the books, we're talking about the books. They're not going to be counting against the cap for that much long. But I suppose the question becomes at that point, what changes do the Colts need to make, and how long can they wait to make them? And I think most of us agree they can't wait that long. So we're going to have to see. But the Ryan Kelly discussion is one that I feel the Colts really have to think long and hard about what they want to do there, because you're paying a right tackle at a position that you've drafted now 2 seasons in a row. You're paying a guy at that position $20 million, okay? And a guy that, respectfully, as good as he's been, was kind of banged up a little bit before whatever it is that's going on was going on. I know it might be a little inhumane to say, hey, man, you go through some shit, now we cut you. But the NFL, as much as it's about relationships and all of that stuff, is also about business. And they're in the business of winning games and putting the best roster possible that they can onto the field going into a given season. And does Braden Smith lend to that more than Ryan Kelly at this point? I don't know. You also have to assume Ryan Kelly's not going to cost $20 million, right? So that comes into the equation as well. All of that is before we even discuss Will Fries, who is a tough one, right? Because of all the guys we've spoken about so far, he's going to be the cheapest one to keep around. Like, coming off an injury, like a broken tibia, which is absolutely severe, okay, you have to assume that most teams are going to have some level of hesitation on that. But a guy who once caught a lot of grief from Colts fans now looks to be a pivotal piece in making sure this offensive line doesn't become a massive question mark moving forward, at least when you take into account how much it would cost to keep him. And then you bring back Pinter and have Baylor Tortellini. You have Wesley French coming back. You have someone in the draft. Presumably, we always draft the offensive line. I'll keep banging that point home. Will Fries and keeping him seems to be the easiest decision of all for the Indianapolis Colts, but we're not 100% sure that's the direction they're going to go. At least this is my perception of it. Like, I may be looking at this all wrong, and you may lay out a different situation for the offensive line in the comment section, and I may say, you know what, I stand down, but this is just me observing it at face value. But I do suppose, of these 3 in Ryan Kelly, Braden Smith, and Will Fries, in my personal opinion, if I made a prediction, Somebody is going to be gone between the three of them this offseason. And I suppose my overarching point is that you got to keep two of the three to ensure the unit doesn't slip under the cracks or slip through the cracks going into next season. And if we're to keep two of the three, it would actually be the two guys with expiring contracts, if you asked me. And then Braden Smith, I would find the means to move him or do something to get that money off the books if I had to. Or I guess you could keep all of them on the books. But again, hard for me to really operate entirely off of knowledge here because I don't know what the hell is going on with Braden Smith. Like, I don't want to sound disrespectful or facetious, but at the same time, I have no other way to put it. Something is going on, and we don't know what it is. And it's just another situation where, as Colts fans, we're kind of left here to guess because they like to keep things in-house. And I'm not saying they owe us any information per se, but at the same time, I mean, hell, for the purposes of me having a little podcast in my bedroom, it does become a little difficult to have the discussion. But this is a position, as I said, to kind of conclude what it is that we're talking about here. Colts have to be very, very careful with how they handle this going into the offseason, and they should think long and hard about letting Ryan Kelly walk if that's the direction they seem to be leaning. I don't know if it's been implied one way or another, but I don't think retirement's on the table. And I think if money is a concern when you're talking about an organization in a little bit of turmoil right now, if money's a concern in keeping someone so stable like a Ryan Kelly, you just might want to think twice about that. But that's the episode. You made it to the end. Like, subscribe if you have not done so yet. Leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. My name is Justin. This right here was the Ryan the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, that was annoying. Go Colts.